Hi, I'm Stephen. This is Mick, and today we're going to be talking about governance. Before we begin, though, we just want to say that this is only a discussion. There are no right or wrong answers. These are just our thoughts and opinions, which can and will change. Neither of us are experts on anything. We are just two dudes talking. So, Mick, governance is a pretty broad topic, and we're going to be looking at it in terms of local and global. But first, I want to kind of define these terms and get an understanding so that we know we're kind of on the same page about what we're talking about. So let's go with governance first. I'll read the dictionary definition of it, and then we'll maybe talk about, because usually I look at the dictionary definition and I'm like, it's close to what we were talking about, but a little bit off. So I think it's a good starting point, and then we can describe, okay, what do we actually mean when we say it? So governance by the dictionary is the act or process of governing or overseeing the control and direction of something, such as a country or an organization, which is pretty close to how I picture it. I see governance, and specifically in how we're going to talk about it, as the source of decisions, where decisions are made, where control is dictated from. So yeah, is that kind of how you see governance, and specifically for how we're going to talk about it?
Yeah, so I mean, it's always brought up, I guess, in from a perspective of a group of people. But even if you think about yourself, self-governance, I guess for me, it's kind of like a guiding set of principles that help you get a desired outcome that you need to try and adhere to. So whether that be at a like a large, a global level, or whether that be just to yourself, I think that's the general sort of idea that I get when I hear of governance is, okay, here's a set of guiding principles, or here's a set of rules that have helped get a desired outcome in the past. So it helps to adhere to them, to try and have some discipline to them in order to get the same outcome in the future. And so that process is, whether that be collectively or by yourself, I go back to by yourself, is that you try and self-govern yourself against those principles in order to get that desired outcome, even if in the moment you have a desire to not do that.
So do you see it more as the result, the actual rule set that we operate by, and not necessarily where that decision is made? Like, for example, when I'm talking about it, like you said, we generally think about it in terms of human, but I don't even think about it from that perspective. I just think about it. Imagine the human, a single individual human, and controlling our body. Like, the control of the body usually comes from the brain and the nervous system. And so that dictates, that comes up with, okay, this is how I'm going to move. This is how I'm going to use the body. Or what's another example we could give that's not human?
So I think there's like, I'm trying to remember exactly what it's used for, but there's like a governor. There's actually a governor on like lawnmowers and motors and things like that, which actually help control. I think it's the acceleration I think it's the acceleration or speed of the motor itself. No, I think it's speed actually. Someone could correct me, but yeah. So and that's how that governor, the motor obviously does what it needs to do, but that governor then keeps that motor in check in order to constrain it to some kind of limits in order to get a desired outcome of obviously not over, having a speed over where it should be, or acceleration. I forget, but yeah. So I guess from a physical object point of view, it's doing the same thing. It's something there that helps control an outcome that's been predetermined. And I guess that predetermined is off some experience or some kind of past situation which has already been through and got a desired outcome. So I sort of see it as the act. Governing is the act. It's that, how do you have some control over something in order to get a desired outcome, so that in the moment the decisions are well defined and not something where you go off on different areas. So you've got a well defined sort of set of principles or guides that you go to. So it's sort of the act of adhering to that, I guess.
Yeah, okay. I think I'm still a little bit confused on how you see it. Let me try another example. So when I'm talking about it, I'm talking about there's something that's coming up with how to act, which is the controller, and then there's something that is performing the action, which is what I'm going to call the controlled. Now, they can be separate or they can be the same thing. Like it could be in that motor. What was the lawnmower example? You said there's a separate aspect of the lawnmower or separate component of the lawnmower that tells the other components how to act. But it could be each individual component decides for itself, this is how I'm going to act. This is how much petrol I'm going to release into the engine, into the cylinders or whatever. Yeah, so that to me is kind of how I try and simplify it in my mind is there's a source of control, which is what I'm saying is the governance, and then there is something that is performing, executing an action that is dictated by whatever is controlling.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to separate the two. I see it as the process of those two working together. Yeah, so the process of governance is the process of a controller and the person, well, not person, and the thing being controlled is the process of them two sort of synchronizing, I guess. Whereas if I was to think about what the controller does, there's a list of requirements that it provides for you to follow. So if I was just to look at that, it feels like that separating out, I think, part of the process that's important. So it takes two things to happen here, and one needs to follow the other. I guess is the governance part. So like if I think of a really simple example, if I want to, let's say I want to get fit, I need to go to the gym. There's certain things I need to do at the gym to help me get fit. The process of me adhering to that structure and getting fit is me having some governance over that situation. So yeah, I don't know if that lines well with the term, but yeah, that's kind of the way I see it. It's the process.
No, that's all right. I think we can move on to the next thing. I think throughout the conversation, it'll kind of clear up. This is how I see it. I mean, this is how it usually goes, is that we come at it from two different perspectives and we both struggle to really put into words exactly what we mean by it. And then throughout the conversation, like there'll be certain things that we say that the other person will pick up on and go, oh, is this what you meant by that? And then that'll kind of clear it up in our minds. So I don't think we have to fully define anything right now. We just have to, kind of, it's just getting a bit of an idea. All right. So if we're happy with that, let's move on to what we mean by local and global. And again, this is just in general terms. This isn't necessarily in relation to what we mean by governance. But when we say local and global, maybe I'll let you do this because you had a good explanation of it before, how it was kind of, shows you the range of something.
Yeah, so I'll start from that generic point and maybe I can put something as a bit of a tangible example to it. So the way I said it, so that local and global sort of tied to the word of governance is that they're both ideals to communicate a range or a spectrum in which you reside in. So I don't think either one are completely achievable. So I don't think there's any situation where you just completely have local control over something, or any situation where you have complete global control of a situation. There's this spectrum in between, and I guess it's depending on whereabouts in that spectrum you actually are. And I think each of the controls, like if you look at this, to me, it's like a scope. And if you look at the scope, a local scope and a global scope have different benefits. And I guess you would use them in different situations. And then I guess thinking about that, how does that tie to individuals? So I think like local control is something that you have an ability to have input into how something is being controlled. So I see that as going down to more the local side, where you actually have an input to those controls that are going to be applied, and then you're able to obviously follow that process. Whereas global, I think you start to lose that ability to have any input into the controls that you need to follow. So it's sort of this separation about, and I guess I'm looking at it from an individual, but you can sort of think of that, maybe that governor, like the motor we were talking about before. If you see the motor as being local and then you're seeing this governor, which is an external component, I would say that the governor is kind of like that global control. It doesn't actually need to basically communicate with the motor itself in order to have some control over the motor. And the motor doesn't actually have any input to that. So it's just basically monitoring the motor and then adjusting itself accordingly. So it's kind of this separation between, I guess if you broke it up before, you had the thing being controlled and the controller. So to me, local, as we go down the local end, the thing being controlled has input, and as we go to the global end, the thing starts to lose that input over its controls.
Yeah, the way I think about it is in terms of distance, or distance between what is controlling and what is being controlled. Now that is a limited way to look at it, and I'll explain what I mean by that a bit later on, but just to stick with this for now. Yeah, how far from the decision-making process is the thing that has to actually act on the decision-making process? So if we want to talk about local and global, it would be that, and again, this is completely subjective and very loose, it'd be the thing that is being controlled, the thing that is performing the action is very close to the thing that is making the decision. So for a human being, it would be we ourselves are the ones making the decision about how we act versus someone else is telling us how to act. They are separate to us. They are at a distance from us. That would be global control if someone else was telling us how to do something rather than we are coming up with a decision about what we want to do and then performing that action ourselves.
Yeah, okay. So I think it's quite similar in the way we see it, but we've got different ways that we kind of relate or describe it, I guess. So that distance to me is kind of similar to what I was suggesting, is that as the controller has less input to its controls, it's similar to what the distance is increasing. So
say that again, but in kind of rephrase it if you can, because I think I'm sort of getting where you're coming from.
Yeah, so you describe that there's a distance between the controller and controllee. So when you describe that distance, and I think you described that it has less, what was it? Less control. I called it less control over its outcomes, but you said something a little bit different. I forget the term that you used, but in any case, you call the distance away from the further that the thing being controlled is from its ability to make decisions, the further away from local control it becomes and the more global it becomes. So it's similar in the concept that I'm seeing that same separation. So as the controlled piece has less input, which is the decision making, it is further away from its own local control to a point where it doesn't actually have any input, and then that would be considered right down the extreme end of the global control of the situation.
Yeah, it sounds like we are talking about the same thing. We're just using different languages and approaching it from different perspectives, which is completely fine. Yeah, when I say distance, it's not necessarily physical distance. It's how much. Again, you probably actually had it more accurately in the way you were phrasing it. Then it's how much input the thing that is being controlled or the thing that is performing the actions has over what it is doing and what actions it's doing. It is performing. The other thing that I like to keep in mind is that, and to separate local and global, is the awareness or understanding of, again, what is doing the decision making and what is performing the action or is being controlled. So how much awareness does the thing have about the strengths and weaknesses of that which is performing the action, the limitations of that, or even the desires of the person being controlled. So I was trying to keep it general so that we didn't get into the trap of like we kind of removed emotions a little bit, but it's a little bit difficult to talk about it when you do talk about it generally. So how about we just stick to human beings? So for example, think about local control would be an individual human being coming up, making their own decisions, performing their own actions. Global control in terms of human beings would be someone else dictating how someone acts and what they do. Is that fair? You agree with that?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay. So when I'm saying that in global control, or the difference between local and global here would be how much understanding do you have about the individual human being that he's having to perform the actions? Do you understand that person's strengths? Do you understand that person's weaknesses? Do you understand the limitations of what that person is capable of doing? Do you understand or even care about what the desires and wants of that human being are? So a really good example for this, ask me to paint a photorealistic landscape. Good luck. Like, do you want a good outcome or not? You're probably going about it the wrong way if you're going to ask me to do that. So does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's something I actually didn't think about is, so what you're taking into account is the amount of knowledge each thing has about the other, I guess. So it's a really good point, because I guess some global decisions are made because the local, the where the thing being controlled is, it doesn't have the knowledge in order to possibly make its own decision at that point. So you think about a kid. A kid's always controlled by its parent, yeah? And so in the early stages, the kid is probably at great risk to harm itself. So what you do is, because you have that knowledge and the kid doesn't, you actually help make decisions for the kid, to keep it safe. And so that kid doesn't actually have input into that, because it's not at a competent level to do so. And I guess vice versa. I think the other thing that you were saying, so that's on that side of having that sort of self-control or that local control. And then the vice versa was also important and true, is that if you're making global decisions, if you are the parent in that situation, are you taking the person that you're trying to control into account? All their desires, wants, are you respecting they're an individual human, or are you sort of making a mockery of them, I guess? Not a mockery, but maybe you're underestimating their capabilities, or something along those lines. So, yeah, I think that's actually something I hadn't thought about that's very important, in particularly when we're talking about humans or living things, I guess.
I think the parent-child relationship is a great example just to look at, in terms of, you want to start off with kind of global control. So the parent has pretty much complete decision-making over the child. But then as the child grows, it kind of goes like from global to local. You want to give more and more decision-making, more and more control to the child. And so, yeah, understanding that balance. And this is where it's important when you're talking about global, but also from local perspective. Let's look at the global perspective first. So the parent, you want them to understand enough about the child. Like, they could be trying to get the child to do something that the child is incapable of doing. And so that's kind of a bad situation. And that's when you want to give more control to the child, more localized control there. So like, you could ask them, do you want to, go and play on the playgrounds? Do you want to go down the slide or whatever? Because the child may not be comfortable with that. But if you just tell the child, go down the slide, go on the swings, go do this, you kind of, it depends what your outcome is. If your outcome is just to control the child, if your desire is just to control the child and get them away from you and get them distracted, whatever, that may work. But if your desire is to bring happiness to the child, or, help them grow, learn and develop, then you need to take these things into consideration.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's this, I guess it's also like that balance of free will versus the setting of expectations, or that's probably the lack of a better word, but sort of like, I guess what you're trying to do is set expectations for the child, so the child understands how to maybe keep itself safe, or to respect others and all the rest of it, but then having the free will to make the decisions to get to that, those, I guess, expectations to certain points. I mean, expectations is even hard, because, how do you actually keep free will and then set of expectations? That's a tricky one. And I guess we all are part of that bit of mess of how do we live with each other. So as that kid grows up, the parent's going to take less control over the kid and give them more responsibilities and more freedoms. But then that kid goes into the world itself and a bigger social structure than just their family. And then they have to sort of integrate into that, this balance of having enough free will to be able to follow their desires, but then not so much that their free will can then impact other people's free wills around them, I guess. So it's this agreement about expectations, I guess, is where some of that global sort of governing is important, I guess.
I hope that as the child grows up, the parent is giving them more freedom, more control. But sometimes we don't see it. And that comes down to, again, what is the expectations? What is the desire of the two parties here? What is the desire of the adult? Is the desire to have this being that they control, that they can do with what they want? Or is the desire to bring up this individual free agent that can go out and act around the world based on their own desires and wants and opinions? And so, yeah, that's where it comes to when we talk about at a broader scale in terms of like society, communities, civilization. What is it we're trying to achieve? Is it what some individual or some small group of people want to achieve, or is it what each individual wants themselves, their wants, their desires?
Yeah, I guess when I hear what you're saying there, I guess the first kind of feeling is that the intent of the governing body, whatever that is, the intent has the best interest of those that it governs. So, and that's a really hard thing to actually determine. So what you're sort of saying there is like, is the individual controlling wanting to get some kind of personal gain or some kind of gain to them, and that's why they're controlling and providing governance and control over a situation to get an advantage, or is it an intent for a desirable collective outcome that they're trying to achieve? And so it's really down to the intent of the person or the people, the governing body, whatever the governing body is. It's really down to intent. Why are they setting these principles or guides or rules or whatever we decide to determine? That intent is critically important, I think.
And do we agree on them? So if we have some institute, some government that is trying to tell us how to act, how to behave. No, not even that, sorry. They have some kind of direction, something they're trying to achieve. First of all, do we agree with what they're trying to achieve? That's the first thing I think that is important to look at, because if there's disagreement in what we're trying to achieve, for example, maybe they're trying to say, okay, our intent is to collect as much power for ourselves, as much power, wealth, value as we can for ourselves and screw everyone else. And our intent is like, hang on a second, I don't agree with that. I think everyone should have equal power, wealth, or whatever. Or no, it should be based on how much value they provide to society or whatever. Whatever you want. If there's a disagreement there, then I'm like, that's your first step. That's going to be difficult in terms of having global control. I think that you're going to run into a lot of issues. Then the second step is, okay, say we do have the same intent. We're trying to save energy. What do you call it? Renewables.
Sustainable energy.
Sustainable energy. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Climate control, all that kind of stuff. Say, okay, we agree we are wasting energy. How do we solve this problem? And what the global control, the centralized control comes up with, you're like, hang on a second, I don't agree with how you've come up with that, but I still have to follow what you're saying. Like even if what they're saying is false, even if what they're saying doesn't make any sense, even if it's illogical, just because you are the decision-making source, we have to now go along with you.
Okay, so say that again. So we've got a collective goal to create sustainable energy, but the difference is you don't get to decide how to achieve that, I guess.
Let's stick to, okay, let's look at the first, I don't know, what do you want to call it, pillar, is do we agree on the outcome? Do we have the same intent?
Yeah, so okay, the first question is, before you start to govern something, is the outcome that we're trying to achieve by putting governance in place collectively agreed upon? Or is there some consensus on that?
Yes.
Yep.
And so I think that's the first thing when you're talking about local control, it's the individual themselves. So you think they have a pretty good idea. Some people maybe not. And that's where I think you can have the discussion of, okay, the people that maybe have mental issues that can't really decide for themselves or don't understand how to get what they want, then maybe you can talk about maybe someone else can help and look after them. Maybe control can come from somewhere outside of them. But I think again, that in itself is a big discussion. But I think for the majority of us, just we each know what it is that we want, what outcome we're looking for. And if we're going to allow someone else to control us, or if we're going to say someone else has power over us, we have to first agree that we want the same outcome.
Yeah, so I think what you're sort of highlighting here is the messy part of trying to achieve some kind of level of global governance, because at what point do you then have the input from the local level in order to have an agreement on the framework of whatever that global governance is? And so, yeah, that is messy to try and get people not only collectively on a common goal, but then if you've got that goal, then there might be different paths to get to that goal. And how do you go about deciding who gets to have input to those different paths? So I can imagine with the sustainable energy one, it's really interesting in that I think maybe the outcome is what we try to collectively see if we agree upon. But then when that outcome's decided upon, who do you get to then provide the solutions? And I would say that you would be looking for professionals in those fields to help guide that path, because the knowledge of an individual wouldn't know how to make the best decisions around how to achieve sustainable energy. They probably wouldn't have the knowledge. So it's a really tricky. I think this is where we have the biggest problems. Is how do we navigate a space where we're trying to achieve what everyone wants to have as an outcome, but then how do we make a definitive decision if everyone doesn't agree on that outcome, or to get to that outcome? How do we come to some kind of resolution at that point? Or do we just do nothing? And so that is the tricky part to navigate, I feel.
Well, that's the thing. Even if we don't agree, do we have to have some kind of centralized, globalized control over this specific matter? Or can we just say from an individual level, okay, let's all take care of the environment around us and then it'll sort itself out? With the renewable energies and sustainable energies, I think we're stuck on that first step. So again, the two steps as I see it so far, and there might be more, I haven't really thought through it. This is just off the top of my head right now. So the first thing is agreeing on the outcome, agreeing on what we want. And then the second step would be agreeing on the approach to get that outcome. I think we're, in terms of renewable energies and sustainable, whatever, that we are actually disagreeing even on the outcome at this point, because what is it that we want? Do we want to reduce the amount of carbon emissions that we are putting out, or do we want to, at the cost of some, what do you call them? Not amenities, some luxuries that we have, for example, having lights, having heat? Or do we want to have sustainable energy but maintain a certain level of comfort, a certain level of what we have, a certain, because if you just take away all the electricity that we use right now, you can live that way, but do you want to live that way? Is it worth trying to, getting rid of all the sources of energy we have in order to live a less quality of life? Or is there a quality of life that we're trying to maintain whilst doing this? Like, what is your limitations on the way to getting that outcome?
Yeah, and it never gets put broadly enough, I feel, the question of these kind of questions. So I think what you're sort of highlighting here is even if we agree on sustainable energy, there's two parts to how sustainable energy is achieved. One part is about how much energy you actually use. So what are the comfort levels for each individual? So, some individual might want to just have, like their lights turned off throughout their house and they only have one room on. Another person might want to have like artistic LEDs everywhere or whatever. So, what is the comfort level people are willing to have? And then once we get that comfort level, what sources of energy do we actually use? And I guess even sources of energy is a debate, because I always find this is a tricky one where technology pushes us forward to save some kind of resource or save energy or save something in some way. But then there's a capital in order to get to that technology, to realize that technology, and that capital comes at a cost. And so I think that's something will be interesting about renewable energy. So, for instance, electric cars, it seems all great, but do we really know what infrastructure is actually required and the materials required in order for everyone to convert their petrol car to a electric car? And is that trade-off, that capital trade-off to switch that technology, is it worth it? Or is there other ways in which we can look at that? So some people might even say, well, rather than making everyone have electric cars, should we look at people, people doing travel more together. So there's a lot of argument about having really good public infrastructure, because one train carrying, 1,000 people or whatever is a much more efficient outcome than it is to have 1,000 people drive the roads, each in their individual cars. So there's a whole range of decisions that make it hard for us to collectively agree. And at what points do you get that input at the local level to help drive a collective vision, I guess?
Yeah, that capital cost is a big part of it, but also the cost over the lifetime. We don't necessarily think, okay, what about 20, 30 years down the road? What happens then? What happens when you have to dispose of these components that are now very hazardous, that you got to get rid of? Maybe there is another way that you can do it instead of switching everyone to electric cars. Maybe, okay, you can't buy 5, 10 different cars. You got to stick to one car for over a prolonged period of time. And that actually reduces emissions far more than switching everyone to electric. When you look deeper, when you scratch below the surface, when you go under the skin, you realize that there's a lot more depth to it, a lot more nuance, a lot more that isn't actually taken into consideration. Like a lot of these one sentence slogans or whatever that you hear, they don't cover nearly enough to actually give you an approach or give you a outcome that is actually achieving what it says it's going to achieve.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's similar. Yeah, that's a really interesting human problem. It's similar when people first find an answer to something too. They do a similar thing. So, they see something as a problem. They find the first answer that makes sense to them. Then they set their sails on that answer without any further investigation. And yeah, I guess as we've set up like a capitalistic environment, and as we have businesses in there, once they find a solution that someone else doesn't have, even if it's not considered the best, they're going to drive that if they see that there's business activity that can be created from that. So, and it might not be the best solution, but it's one in which they can see others will uptake. And even just like you said, just what materials you do have, but like you said before, is then what do you do with the materials afterwards? So it'll be interesting to see whether electric cars become disposable because of the battery, like our phones are. So you remember mobile phones, you used to be able to swap your batteries out. You used to be able to just, spend $30, get a new battery, have your old mobile phone up and running. Today's technology makes it very difficult. You can still do it as a professional, but you do need a professional to take that phone apart, pull the battery out. In some cases, I believe you have to solder that battery out, solder in a new battery. And so people are more inclined to throw that phone away. Managing the life cycle of materials is definitely something that's very interesting and doesn't get taken into account throughout a lot of these decisions. I think that's one of our biggest mistakes, I guess, is that we've set up an environment which we've set up a really good environment for us to continually grow, I guess, grow at a rapid pace. But then how do we haven't got really good checks and balances to maintain certain things. So we're always looking to, so like you said about that, I feel like often we turn to technology to solve something that we want to indulge in rather than looking in the indulgence that we have and cutting back on that. So a little bit like you were saying before is, we need a certain, 10 cars. So do you really need the 10 cars, and all the materials that get taken to that? And then after those 10 cars, you don't want to dispose of them, and then what happens to those materials? Do you really need the 10 cars? Is that too indulgent? Or do we turn to technology? Technology will solve, if I have 10 cars, that's fine because technology is going to solve the emissions that I put into the environment and all the rest of it. So people kind of fool themselves that sometimes I think that technology is the answer because they're trying to avoid something that they don't want to sort of have control over, that indulgence themselves.
Yeah, I always think you should first be at peace, comfortable with nothing, with the environment. Once you get yourself to that point where you understand that, that's when you can start looking at things and indulging in them. Because at that point, it's like you're no longer reliant on it. It's no longer like, you're no longer looking for that fix, for that piece of technology, for that consumer good or whatever it is. It's like, oh, this makes life better. So you appreciate it, you use it. But then if something comes along, if it's unsustainable in order to maintain that. You're like, okay, I'll let it go. I don't actually need it. This is just a benefit. And I feel we appreciate things more when we don't need them, but we have them. When we realize we don't need it. If you feel like you're always needing something, well, then you're not really appreciating it. But if you feel like, oh, this is just a benefit this is just on top of what I already had. It's like, it's icing on the cake. How cool is that? Whereas it's like, no, I need this TV. I need this new article of clothing. I need these new pair of shoes, whatever it is. It's like,
yeah, you're right. Like in the environment in which we currently operate, I think we're always looking what we don't have rather than actually what we do have. The whole keeping up with the Joneses is a classic case of that. And I think as a society, I don't know what, third world countries are, but I do feel that as a sort of first world countries, that's something that we take for granted. Like, I even think of this sometimes, you sort of go for a country drive and you see the sheep or horse or cows out in the paddock, and you realise if I had to go and sit in that paddock and sleep in the paddock for a week, how weak we actually are. And part of that weakness is obviously we've built tools to shelter ourselves and to help make an easier life. But we don't really appreciate just even the house and heating we actually have. It's like taken for second nature. But like you said, once you realise that, oh, well, like all I need to do is walk inside and I'm warm, and you appreciate that, it just makes life much easier because your expectations are not set to astronomical levels that, in some cases are completely unachievable. And if you can't get that expectation, then your whole life is ruined. So yeah, I would definitely agree is that, learning how to be at peace with having minimal is your first step to having a society that is thoughtful about the decisions it makes. That's something I don't think we do at all. We're not thoughtful about many of our decisions. They're just so rash and they're so obnoxious in some cases, and it just doesn't take into account factors that need to be taken into account. And when it does, it's interesting. I kind of wonder, like these. If we think about energy and you're doing another energy plant and you have to take out an area that's actually it's completely unbuilt, so it's like bushland or whatever you need to take away. Environmental reporting is almost like that's the path you need to manipulate in order to get that approval, rather than this is if you can't respect these, then it's really not determined valuable to build it. So I feel like we try to put these things in place in our current system because the way our current system works, it's almost like, okay, these are the rules I need to get around in order to get the desired outcome, and they're not really respected to what the value of those rules actually bring.
I agree with a lot of what you said. That you said a lot. The main thing in trying to sum up all of that is that the system is set up in such a way that it drives us to be unappreciative of stuff. It's always trying to push us to have more, to think faster, to make more rash decisions because of the way that it's set up. If you act against that, it's difficult to get ahead in that system. You have to actually break out of it. Like you have to, I can't think at the moment, but that's the general where it's coming from. Man, you said a lot. I'm trying to recall everything that you said to cover it again. So I'm gonna move on. All right, we're gonna get back. We've diverged from local and global. I'm just gonna no. It was good. It was a really good thing. But let's get back to local and global somehow. One thing actually I will bring up before I get onto that, in terms of we just throw away things now. Whatever happened to that? Reduce, reuse, recycle. The idea that the first thing you try and do is reduce your consumption. Then if you can't do that, you try and reuse it in some other way. Then if you can't do that, you recycle it. And then the last option is, okay, now you can't do anything else with it. Now you can waste it. What happened to that?
I don't know. All my life I felt, not all my life, but all my sort of older life, I felt a significant amount of anxiety for this because, often I have things that are reusable, but I just don't know where to take them. And maybe I think why that has fallen off is because the way in which recycling was promoted doesn't actually seem to be working that way properly. And so people have lost confidence and also lack of education. Do you know what to put in your recycling bin?
No.
I'm the same.
That drives me crazy looking at a bottle and then having that number on the bottom. It's like, can I recycle this? I don't know. And then you look it up online. It's like, well, we don't even know if you can recycle it or not. I feel like the whole, again, reduce, reuse, recycle, it was a good idea that someone was like, hey, that's a great idea. And then they stopped there. It wasn't like, okay, how do we actually implement this? It was like, no, it's a good idea. That's enough. Like, it seems like a lot of things nowadays are, hey, that's a good idea. Let's move on to another idea.
Yeah, it almost gets people, I mean, that feels like the election cycle. So basically it's about whoever provides the greatest ideas. And then after that, no one, half of them don't get executed. No one keeps them accountable to those decisions being made. All sorts of issues start to unfold. But you're right. Yeah, it's like a good idea is what gets you into the game, and following through on that idea is never kind of almost not checked.
Yeah, there's no follow through. There's no, let's look up, did they actually do this? Did they? And then sometimes maybe you will execute on an idea, but it will turn out poorly. And instead of saying, let's try and fix it, it's like, no, let's scrap it and go with a new idea. It's like, maybe you need to try it a different way. But anyway.
So I'm going to ask you something actually. Like, I know you've probably got a few things on your mind, but okay. So considering our current environment, does it set us up well to navigate that balance between having local and global control, or does it? So one of the things I wonder is that at times, I guess, as a society, we fluctuate between the two. And some nations obviously are, almost to the point of full sort of global power where they control their citizens to the nth degree, and other countries appear to be a lot more freer. But do you feel that there's a shift in one towards one or the other? And if so, do you think that's a result of our system, or is there some other factors at play of, if we see that spectrum, ideally we probably want to be sort of somewhere in the center where you're getting some input, but you don't get full control of input. And then we're getting some global controls that help us get to some expectations we want collectively. I don't know.
I think you very aptly put it that some countries appear to be freer, because appearance seems to be the way it is, especially after the last couple of years. That's how it feels. Where to begin with this? So I think the way I see it, and the reason I like the idea of global control, and local control, sorry, not global. And the reason I wanted to do this topic is actually, it's from a long time ago. This kind of thought came in my mind, and it was back in uni. So that was maybe like 6-7 years ago when we learnt about swarm behavior. And anyone who doesn't know about swarm behavior, I highly recommend go and look it up. Just watch a video on YouTube or something. There'll be really cool examples. It's basically, if you think of like ants or bees, the idea is that each individual ant, each individual bee, they make their own decisions. There are specific roles, like there are like worker ants, there are queen ant that have specific functions within the society, community, population, whatever the word would be. But for the majority of it, they all have just this simple rule set that they operate on, and they only interact with their local environment. So no one's sending them or calling them via cell phone, telling them, hey, worker ant, go over here, there's food over here. No, the way it works is that they each individually just walk around the environment. At some point, I'm talking about ants here, at some point, one of them will run across some food. It will start taking that food back to the nest. As it goes back and forth, it's leaving these pheromones, it's creating a trail. As it goes back and forth, that trail gets stronger and stronger. More ants will run into it just randomly, hit that pheromone trail and go, hey, this is a pretty strong trail. And they'll start following it back and forth. And pretty soon you've got a line of ants running down your hallway trying to get from one end to the other, because there might be food there or something. But that's like how they work. And no one told them to do that. No one said to the ants, hey, all you ants, go here, grab that food. It's all based on them interacting with their local environment. And if you look at ants and you look at the structures that they make, like if you've ever seen, how they've got like glass plates, and then you see all the paths that they make and the tunnels that they make, all that again is based off of local behavior that each individual ant is interacting with their environment. No one's telling them how to do that. No one's telling them put a school here, put a hospital here, whatever. It's all just they're interacting with their own environment based on a similar rule set. And what I'm trying to get at here is, even with that simple control structure, each individual person sensing their local environment, interacting with their local environment, even that can result in really complex behavior when you zoom out and you look at it from like the group level. And so what I'm trying to say here with humans is, a lot of the time I feel that we desire globalized control because there's a certain level of uncertainty in saying that each individual go about and interact with the environment based off of, your own principles or a collective set of principles that we all have. I think that's the key that's missing, and that's the reason we don't do it, is that we don't have a collective set of principles. I think if we did, it'd be a lot easier to have localized control. But I think, once again, the main thing is that we currently desire this globalized control, or we look to this globalized control because there's a certain false sense of certainty in it. Like we think that, they have an understanding of all the pieces on the chessboard. They know what to do with that. And again, they have the same intent as us, or they desire the same outcome as us, which may not necessarily be true. Whereas if we can get to this point where we trust each other enough, we have this comfort with uncertainty to say, yes, let each individual make their own decisions, and then we just let it happen. And then after that, zoom out, you'll see this complex behavior start to emerge without anyone centralized, any central planning, nothing. I mean, if you go back in time and you look at the history of money and how like gold was chosen to be money, it's naturally emergent. It isn't, and no one dictated that gold should be used as money. It's just naturally emergent because people were interacting with their environment and they figured that, this is the best way to do it. And then it eventually spreads. You zoom out and you see, okay, now everyone's using gold.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I think the answer is a good example. I do believe that we have a desire for that global governance, and I believe that's probably something evolutionary or biologically, because we are pack. I do believe we're pack creatures. So I kind of wonder, I'm trying to think of a really solo creature. I think shark. Oh, maybe not all sharks, but possibly like a shark is a solo creature. It's a predator. It basically doesn't care too much maybe about its peers. It's after food, and it will make its own decisions. And it's got the biologic makeup in order to do those. So whereas fish or birds or ants or humans, I would put in that category, are pack animals. So we're always looking to others to see how we survive, I guess. But I think what's neat in what you were saying there is that if you use the ant analogy, and it's hard to really understand exactly what the ants are, how they're communicating or what they're doing in that point in time. But I think what you, I guess, highlighting there to me was that biologically, those ants, I guess, when they're born or whatever, they kind of know their role internally. There's a biological makeup that they've got everything inside and they know their role. And so left to their own natural devices, they will do what is best for themselves, but also their community. So like you said there, is each, some of them have got roles. So obviously the queen was born a queen. The soldiers were born, I guess, soldier. I don't know, someone determines that or whatever. But I guess once they have that role, they sort of naturally know, okay, this is what my role is to do, and therefore I just follow that intuition to get the solution. And I guess maybe in the current environment, that freedom for each individual is not really there. It seems like we are not secure enough, whether that's mentally or other forms, to allow that level of uncertainty to occur. And so we keep putting more and more rules on to try and control our environment, and it keeps going in, I guess, in an opposite direction where each individual is now more and more constrained to make their own decisions that, in hindsight, given freedom, would probably, for most individuals, would probably make a good decision not only for themselves, for others. And so if you constrain them in those situations, then they're unable to contribute, and then it's almost like a segregation where people aren't able to contribute to their own outcomes, and so therefore you're not getting the natural value from each individual.
Yeah, the thing with the ants as well is to consider is that, like you said, they are born with this intuition. This is how I interact with my environment. I mean, we don't know this for sure, but it's unlikely that they're thinking, oh, the way I'm behaving is going to benefit the community, is going to benefit everyone in the ant colony. That's the word. We don't know for sure again, but we don't know that or I don't think that they're thinking that the way I'm acting, the way I'm interacting with my environment is going to benefit the colony. It just naturally emerges that benefits the colony because that's how it survives. Like if you look at evolution, you would assume that, okay, whatever actions, whatever way that these creatures act that will maintain their survival across time, that is what will carry out. That's what it'll evolve. And so similarly with humans, and yeah, we do need to cooperate, but that's just an emergent behavior that will happen, that cooperation, because the ones that don't, the ones that go out on their own, the ones that try and cause trouble within the group, they won't survive over time. And so the ones that act based on their own impulses, intuitions, that will survive over time actually do benefit other people. And I think when thinking about it, when you were talking, I think what goes on is that we don't have that trust in other people that the way that they will act will benefit others. We think that they'll be selfish, but they'll be selfish in a way that is at a cost to other people. Like, again, we can have a conversation about this another time about, is selfishness actually bad, and does it always come at a cost to others? I don't think it does. But what I'm saying here is that we are presented with the worst of people the majority of the time. Turn on the news. At least 90% of what that news is telling you is that people are horrible. People make bad decisions. People hurt one another. People are trying to kill you. It's putting this seed in our mind that, okay, if we allow someone else to make their own decisions, they're going to make a decision that comes at a cost to me. When that, I don't think, is necessarily true. I don't think people inherently are attempting to hurt people. People left to their own devices, left to make their own decisions, as long as they're not vying for survival, as long as they have enough food, as long as they have a shelter, whatever, I don't think their actions are, even if selfish, are to spite someone else, are to hurt someone else. And I think that's the biggest problem, and that's the reason we are looking to global, and I think that's the reason people are going more and more to centralized authority, is that we are whether through intentionally or unintentionally, we are starting to see people as malevolent, as evil, as they will choose to act in a way that will harm me unless someone else with authority and power tells them how to act.
Yeah, I agree with a lot with that. And the first thing that now comes into mind is that you know, playing a bit of a devil advocate, at what point do you allow that individual, at what point do you allow some global governance to come in, or if any? So, you know, I think if I think about history, and there's probably two sides to this. I think, you know, people in power have obviously got in power by forcing their vision on others, and maybe once they succeed that vision, everyone around them feels elated because they saw someone take control of something in front of them. But then other parts could be that you know, you could get, you know, one person in a massive group of people that is you know, ruthless, that doesn't think about others, and then if everyone's to defend them for themselves, how do you do that at a level? Do you allow that to play out locally? And because I agree, you've pinpointed where the fear resides. The fear resides, like you said, is, if we just let people to do everything that they want to do, how do I ensure my own safety? And that is definitely the biggest fear. And I don't think it's a fear without some kind of that's not completely not warranted. I think there is something to be warranted there. So I guess maybe thinking about what you're saying there, when would you think that a situation would occur where you have to have? So it seems like, and we probably agree, we want to try and default more to people having local control or local governance over themselves and all the rest of it, or within smaller groups of themselves. But then at what point do you then introduce some kind of global control in order to, get a desirable outcome, I guess?
This is where I would come back to what we were saying at the start, the distance from what is controlling to controlled. I think the distance is too great at the moment. You have one person or a small collective of people that decide for an entire state, an entire country. I think that is too broad. Whereas if you have smaller groups of people, and I'll say here, have you heard of Dunbar's number? All right, so I'll read out what it is. Dunbar's number is a suggested cognitive limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain stable social relationships in which an individual knows who each person is and how each person relates to every other person. And the number is 150 people. So again, going back to, okay, how much does the person who's making the decision understand about the people who are having to execute on the decision, who are affected by the decision? I think if you have a small enough group where you can have, again, Dunbar's number, if you have 150 people, call that a tribe, then you understand people enough that if one person is acting up, if one person out of that, or two people or three, is hurting other people, we understand each other enough to say, okay, we're going to give this person authority to enact power over them, to say how they can act, how they can't act. But yeah, I guess that is like, we look at that now and that would be localized control compared to the structure that we currently have, which would be more globalized. But if we were to say that, okay, the tribe is the global and the local is the individual, then it would be okay, I think, to shift more power to the global side, because you'd have like a chief or a leader that everyone knows, everyone interacts with. And so when you have that, like this person, you'd expect they want people to appreciate them. They want to have that holding, that position. They want to be looked up to. And so they're not going to act against the tribe. They're not going to act against the group. They know everyone. They know what everyone wants. So they're going to, the decisions that they make, even though they're telling other people possibly how to act, they're going to try and benefit those people as well.
Yeah, so I've never heard of that number, but it makes complete sense that and I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we've had to try and adopt to as humans, is this rapid pace of being able to, well, maybe not know, but being connected to significant amount of people, more than we were probably designed for. So like, having that tribe of 100, 150 is where I guess our limits are. And then, people having, I don't know what they have on Twitter followers and all the rest, having 2 million of them. I mean, obviously there's they're not tangibly connected to all those, but having that individual that has those followers, understanding that their actions is actually being watched and perceived, or maybe even followed by their followers is, I can imagine if you took that seriously, it could be quite anxiety inducing. So yeah, I do think that, as that seems a reasonable level. Then I guess, how would you deal with a situation like, so we've, as we've globalized, we understand we're actually on a planet, and that planet seems to be quite unique and has a lot of things that, a lot of natural systems in place in order for us to keep the life on the planet that we currently do. How do you see, if we were ever to think about, even not just making decisions, but monitoring, say, the oceans at a global level, or monitoring landscapes at a global level, how do you see that would occur while maintaining that local power, I guess?
I don't know. This is where it's like, there's a level of uncertainty, and you have to be comfortable with that level of uncertainty. You have to believe that people, if we are, our basic needs are taken care of, and we have the time to think, we're not pressured to make rash decisions. If we've got time to think that we're not going to destroy our environment, that, I don't know. I can't answer that. That's something that, but I'm not worried about that. I think that if you allow, you need to change the way the system is set up, that it doesn't benefit people or it doesn't necessarily benefit people, or that the people doing this aren't protected if it fails. I think that's a big issue, is that people who make bad decisions, too big to fail, like companies that make bad decisions that ruin other people's lives, that suck value from other people and contribute nothing to society. When they fail, they're bailed out that doesn't make any sense. You need to set up the system so that when people are acting against reality, when people are acting against the benefits of everyone, they need to be allowed to fail.
Yeah, I'd kind of agree. So on one thing I just want to just go back to you about is, so you have a lot of confidence in that desirable global outcomes would emerge just by allowing individuals to somewhat have that intuition in their smaller groups. So you would hope that basically each of those sort of social structures build similar foundations with respect to the environment in which they're living in, and that collectively, because each group would have that internal drive from birth or whatever, that they would then emerge. The emergent behaviour would be that it would happen at a global level without anyone necessarily intervening or having some level of control. I'm a little less skeptical because I don't.
You're a little more skeptical.
A little bit more skeptical, only because I think that there's things that you see at a global level that if you don't put those pieces in place, you might not necessarily see. Now, in saying that, I would also say I would agree that I would lean more to the system side. I think that I don't see that global control is necessarily a significant issue given that it operates within a particular system. Whereas I think that the system which we currently operate means that global control doesn't get the desirable outcome for the individuals that it looks to address, and that's because the goals are all screwed up. So, like, you know, I'm just sort of taking the limited knowledge I have about the American system. So you've got, you know, companies which can basically support global leaders. That I don't think. You know, so each company is able to bring a significant amount of weight due to the financial or other powering aspects they have. And so they have a greater portion of control over the global power than each of the individuals. And so I think there's things in the system such as that which actually ruins its outcome. I do think that humans are set up in a way in which we both have local control, but that there is some benefits from having global control. And I think there's a hierarchy of numbers. I think that humans could do this at a global level. I just think that we don't have the systems and the goals set up correctly. So at the moment, you know, like the stock market's goal is to make their investors money at every cost. So it's a legal requirement. It's almost at every cost, as long as it's, you know, the process which they take under place is somewhat legal. And that's where it gets a little bit messy, because you've got these companies that address their shareholders, and their main responsibility is to make those shareholders money. And the only thing in the way of some of those companies to make that money is some of the regulations and rules which we've tried to agree upon through government. And what they'll end up doing is putting a big portion of money in to change that desire or goal in order to achieve their outcome to get their investors more money. So if you've got a system that does that and doesn't take in consideration of what each individual wants and puts a greater focus on individual companies which are meant to, at their highest level, meant to get their investors' return, then you can see where that global control is going to go. They're not going to listen to individuals that want certain things. They're going to remove the roadblocks in order to get the money to the investors to show continual growth. And so, yeah, I'm not sure I have more confidence about global power given the right system that it would operate in. Yeah.
I agree with you. I think there is a place for more global control, but I also agree with you that you need to set up the system correctly in order to make use of that. And I think the system we've got currently is just completely busted. One of the things I would say that in such a system, it would have to be that wherever this global control is occurring, there has to be no benefit to the individuals that are making those decisions other than what benefits everyone. Like, there should be no incentive for them to act in a way that goes against the benefits of the people that they are controlling or whatever they are reigning over. I think that's a big issue that we've got. As you were saying, like they can be sponsored by big companies to do things in a certain way.
Yeah, 100% correct. And everything, whenever you come to election time, there are obviously some big standout points like, environment's often a big one that people will vote on, or maybe some other social, cultural things like I think same-sex marriage was at one point, or people's liberties. Them dreams are often held up. But a lot of the time, if you remove those dreams there, everything boils down to people talking about economics. This is what we've spent in order to solve this problem. This is what we've made after we've done this. And really, I don't think that's the language or the terms in which we should define success at a governing level, like you said. And I agree with that. That's a really good guiding principle, I think, is that, yeah, at a governing level, it shouldn't be looking to benefit any individual. It should be looking at that sort of like the outcome for everyone, I guess. You put it better before, I think.
Yeah, it should be that the only benefit that the person making the decision can get benefits everyone, benefits the collective. And so, yeah, they can't get like a monetary incentive. They can get praise from people. Like if they're doing a good job, that's a fine incentive to want people to be happy with the way you're performing. That's a great incentive to have, because that means you're going to be doing things that are making the collective happy. But yeah, to be able to get incentive from other places that could come at a cost to the people that you're supposed to be governing over, looking after, that is a big issue to me.
Yeah, and it gets the wrong people enrolled. Like I don't think political leaders are. It'd be interesting to see studies on this or whatever, but I feel like there's a lot of lack of empathy in leaders, and really representing the desire of the collective, and doing those whatever they say, they try to follow through on. If they've made a mistake, they actually present that mistake to others. And maybe I probably haven't made the link between empathy and what I'm saying there, but to me, empathy is always, whenever you're doing something, you're thinking about how it impacts others, or how others, what it means for others and everything like that. So whenever these decisions are made, I don't think that they're looking at the collective when they do that. They're looking at individual elements that either impact them or someone close to them that will eventually impact them. So if it's a business, they know if we make this ruling or we make this decision, this business is going to do this against us, and maybe we lose our votes or something like that. And so then it's just a war between these two parties, rather than really what it's meant to be for, is actually looking for a collective answer or collective guiding principles for everyone within that environment. So yeah, just the system now brings up these aggressive and defensive kind of, and they're really good at it too, the way in which they can be defensive or aggressive, and they manipulate speech in order to get desirable outcomes and everything. And so this system is really bringing out individuals that we probably don't want to be in charge. We want people that have some level of empathy, and look at a society, look at its bottom run and figure out how to get that bottom run higher up, rather than, relying on the top run to keep them in control or in power, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And that sounds like a goal to strive for. I want to talk about a little bit where we think global control is better than local. And usually I am focused on more local, mainly because we see global control or centralized control all over the place. So it's like you tend to look at the opposite, it draws your attention a bit more. It's a bigger contrast. But there are places, even when thinking about it and when thinking about this discussion, where I was like, actually, it probably would be better to have some kind of overarching body or group looking at this and planning it out instead of each individual. For example, you look at a road network. Now imagine if you had every single individual contributing to that road network, nothing would connect. They'd all be different, standards. So there are places like that, roads, cities. But again, I think it's most important to first of all make sure that we want the same outcome. And then once we have that, then it's like, okay, turn it over to the people who can take in all the relative variables and figure out how to plan things out.
Yeah, road network's a really good one. Any kind of infrastructure. Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of little, well, not little. There's a lot of big things that I think that I guess it's where it's even if you go back to that number of 100 and 150 people, there's only a certain amount of things that they can achieve in that group by themselves. And so there is a greater level of synergy the more people you put to it, but then there's the complexity of organising that and getting the outcome. So you can sort of see, the harder the problem comes, it's almost probably like an exponential, because not only does the problem become harder, but the managing of more and more people become also harder to get the collective outcome as well. So I think it's about setting the appropriate amount of people in order to help overcome the problem at hand. And I guess that's really to what impact does it have? What does this decision have? Who does it actually impact? So you think about that road network, it might impact a particular town. It may be bigger than that. It might impact a state, or it may be interstate. And I think at that level, that's when you obviously try and get different parties and people involved. And even at a bigger level, I mean, you think about, like I was saying before, just how would 150 people really understand the change of weather across the planet if they were just left to their own devices? I think they could only get a certain distance on that and that problem. But if you put the whole globe together and you get each individual putting parts into that collective goal, then you can do that. And that is quite valuable, but we just need to set the systems up accordingly so that, like you said, we agree on the outcome. And I guess also we agree on the cost to get that outcome, because every outcome has some kind of cost, I guess. And so that you talk through those trade-offs and all the rest of it, which is kind of funny. I think that's what the government system is trying to be, theoretically, is trying to be set up to do. But I think that, maybe I think we've talked about this in other episodes. There's desirable outcomes of a capitalistic system that we live in, and then there's undesirable outcomes. And I feel that capitalistic system's undesirable incomes has impacted our governing to a point where it's not working the way in which it should functionally.
Are you saying, like you were saying before, that money is the driving factor? Is that what you mean when you think that's...
Yeah. So if you think about, like I was sort of showing a bit of the cycle of how money and, the government impacts certain regulations and rules, which impact businesses, which then they have a legal obligation to get their investors the most money. So if you think about that system, the central theme to that is this, it's almost like a transfer of energy. If you see money as energy, it's transferring the energy across to some individual, I guess, or individual body if you're looking at an organisation. And I think those kind of systems set up in place doesn't really allow the governing to occur the way it could do.
Going back just quickly to tribes and when it's more appropriate possibly to use a global control over a local, in terms of, I'm saying a tribe here would be localized control, again, up to 150 people. I think when the actions of the local impact the broader environment. So say you've got like a tribe, a community that takes a certain bit of land, but the actions that they're doing, they're actually having an impact on land in another location. That's when you kind of need a globalized control that can take a look at all these different little tribes and say, okay, you're impacting the other tribes. Let's figure out how we can best operate so that everyone's needs are kind of met.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think we were talking maybe a little bit before the show, which is, I think land's actually a good one, because you think about, it's a good one to describe the sort of the relationship between having local control and global control. So I think we've gone past the point of where, we buy, well, in Australia anyway, other countries will vary on this, but where you buy a parcel of land, and I guess you're dictated to, in a lot of ways, how you actually use that land. And to me, the freedom should be on the individual. And then then you sort of talk about, well, what are the rules and regulations to make everyone safe to come to that house? And I guess there is a bit of a discussion there, but then each person that enters the house is somewhat responsible as well. So, if you don't see that the house is fit, then it's probably not a good place for you to go visit. And that person that you would have visited might get some understanding of the risk they're taking just by that interaction between the community. But then then if you have parcels of land, how do you then create roads between those places? That becomes more of a global decision. So I think, I forget what you were initially saying. I was sort of going off on a tangent, but I think that really that housing and land and all the rest of it, and then the infrastructure around it shows that balance between the two.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good example where, each individual should have localized control over their parcel of land, but then the networks to get between the parcels of land, maybe that should be a globalized thing, because it, you need someone who can take a broader picture, broader look at things and say, okay, this is how each one connects to another.
Yeah, I think so. And when I say control of land, I'm not talking about, obviously there's certain facilities like sewer pipes and all the rest of it that have to go underneath land. I'm talking about like from our perspective, it's like having new development zones that dictate to you the colour of the house, the type of fencing you use, and all these other constraints that are put on you. And the reason they're doing that is really to have a standard style in which they sell those homes on that land for others to come and buy. So really, those controls put in place aren't really to benefit each individual. They're really to benefit the developers so that they can sell all the blocks of land they want to sell by having a particular style which they can advertise. So that shows you where that global control has gone too far. It's a global control to get a desired outcome for an individual organisation.
It's killing self-expression as well, because you're forcing people to make your house look a certain way, which makes everything just look uniform and the same, and it ends up being like bland and boring. And at what point do people say, you know what, I don't want this anymore, and then they go back to, give me like a fancy old school house with like marble out the front and flamingo statues in the front yard, something wacky.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Mick, is there anything else you wanted to bring up? Anything we didn't touch on?
No, I think it was really interesting actually, but no, it was a really good discussion, and just, I guess, showing what local and global control means, and then figuring out, how it's applied in this day and age, and what we would probably try and improve on.
Yeah, it was a bit of a, meander. We were just kind of walking around seeing what we could find, but I think we touched on some interesting points. There's just a couple of things I want to mention before we go. So once again, I think one of the big issues people have with localized control is that I don't realize you can actually get complex behavior at a group level. And once again, highly recommend go and check out a swarm behavior video, ants or bees, or I can't think, there's plenty of other animals that do it. But check it out and you'll see that you can get quite complex structures from really simple interactions with the environment. Even if we think about atoms, like how atoms interact with one another, they're operating on a localized level. They're just, depending on how many electrons you got or whatever. I'm not a chemist, so I don't know how this works. But they'll join together or they'll repel or whatever. And then if you look at cells in a human body, the cells are taking in their environment and they're saying, okay, given the environment that I'm presented with, I'm going to express in this way. Like there's no centralized control telling you this is how you make up a human body or a tree or an animal or whatever. It's just each individual cell has a set of rules, which is our DNA. And when it looks at the environment, what's around it, and it says, okay, build yourself in this way or manipulate yourself in this way. So once again, you can get really complex structures just from really simple localized control. And then the other thing that I want to mention again is that to me, it seems like your preference, localized, global, is dependent on how comfortable you are with uncertainty. So when you are sitting there hoping for someone else to tell you how to act, or hoping for someone else to tell someone else how to act, maybe take a look at yourself and go, why is that? Why do I want someone else to control the actions of another person or myself?
Yeah, I definitely think the uncertainty things are key. Yeah, that's like the barometer.
Okay, then. My supplemental song suggestion for today is Slave by Ces Cru. And my quote is, "Sovereign is he who decides on the exception," by Carl Schmitt. Thanks for joining us for this discussion. We'd love to hear your feedback about the topic we just discussed. As always, be well.